We were a watercolor, drawn not with brushes but with glances, faint and trembling. You entered like the morning sun through palace glass, not loud, not insistent, just there. I had been taught to walk straight, to speak without shaking, to never falter. But your name melted on my tongue like something forbidden and soft. It was not written in the history books or spoken through state dinners. You, with your quiet eyes, ruined me gently. I was never meant to pause for anyone, and yet you stilled me. My hands, usually so certain with royal gesture, hesitated when they passed by yours. I lived in ceremony, you in silence. But in the hush between our stations, something bloomed. You never bowed the way others did. You looked at me as if I were just a girl. Not a crown, not a line in succession. Just a girl who blushes too easily. And that's where it began, didn't it? Between a guarded heart and a guarded life, something reckless took root. We spoke without speaking, letting our eyes finish sentences that propriety forbade. Even now I remember that first look, like ink dropped into water, spreading, irreversible and beautiful in its defiance. You saw me in the corridors of gold, but never once did you flinch. While others rehearsed their reverence, you dared honesty. And what could I do? My life was rehearsed, a ballet of expectations. But you were unscripted, you carried no crest, no ancient name, and yet you knew me better than the ministers and maids. I memorized your silences like verses, tucked them into my diary like petals pressed between old declarations and duty. I waited by windows not for diplomats, but for you, in my imagination to appear among the trees. Isn't it strange? The heir to a throne waiting like a girl in her first summer of love, heart swollen with secret hymns. You walked beside me once in the royal gardens, a step behind as protocol dictated. Yet I felt your presence as if you had brushed my soul. We didn't touch, not read, but each laugh we shared was an embrace, and each parting glance was a whisper too loud for court ears. There was no trumpet for this kind of love, no anthem. Just the rustle of my dress when I hurried past the portraits of queens who never chose, hoping I could be something else, something softer, more mine. I loved you like I was never meant to, and perhaps that was the cruelest part. You were not noble by blood, but noble in ways that mattered. In the way you waited to speak so I'd never feel interrupted. In the way your gaze never lingered too long, and yet never left. They say a princess must marry for the kingdom, not the heart. But my heart beat rebelliously when you said my name like it wasn't inherited, but earned. We hid in plain sight, two shadows stitched into the tapestry of a life I never quite chose. I remember when you brushed a loose curl behind my ear, a tiny criminal touch. My ladies in waiting saw nothing, or maybe they did and pretended not to, as women often do when love steps over rules. There were evenings when I read poetry aloud in the library, my voice steady for the court, but trembling inside because you were listening. I pronounced each line for you, not the foreign dignitaries, not the counselors, just you. You, who sat so still, like a secret, trying not to be noticed. And I think in those moments, I wasn't a princess, I was simply a girl who wanted to be loved not for what she represents, but for who she is. You loved me in silences. Rare, delicate silences that felt like prayer. I remember once in the chapel, under stained glass saints, you walked behind me, your steps echoing the same rhythm as mine. I almost turned around. I almost forgot every lesson my mother taught me about restraint. I wondered if saints ever had to choose between heaven and a boy who smelled like ink and wood smoke. Our love was not fire, but something gentler, a slow mist curling over the hills of Asturias, a sea tide that crept into the edges of a castle built on tradition. We were soft. That was our rebellion. Not loud declarations or dramatic elopements, just softness in a world of marble. You made me want to speak plainly, to write your name in margins where treaties used to live. I knew then that this story would not be allowed to unfold fully. I am heir to a throne, but not to happiness, not without cost. And yet what a beautiful thing to carry this impossible love, like a sacred wound. A thing I could never show but never stop feeling. You turned me into something more than ceremony. You made me human in a world that only wanted me to be royal. I remember how the seasons changed, and we changed with them. Your eyes held autumn, always. A kind of soft dying, a knowledge that this could never last. But still you stayed near, and I lived for it, the stolen seconds. The barely there smiles across crowded rooms. Our kingdom was in the liminal spaces, hallways, glances, breaths caught in passing. You never asked me to choose you, and perhaps that's what made you so dangerous. You asked for nothing but gave me everything. I carried your gaze like a locket beneath layers of silk and diplomacy. When I danced with foreign princes, I thought only of your quiet laughter. When I raised glasses to alliances, I didn't believe in. I tasted your name instead of wine. You were the ghost I never wanted to exorcise, the ache I kept alive. And yet I said nothing. I did nothing, because being a princess means wearing silence like a gown. But I dreamed, oh I dreamed of us. In a house by the sea far from Madrid, where no one knew our name. Where I could learn how you like your coffee, and you could memorize the sound of my laugh without courtiers nearby. In dreams we were free. Time, of course, is never kind. Not to love like ours. I was summoned to Rome, then to Paris. Galas, banquets, duties, they piled upon me like snow. I saw your face less often, until it became more memory than presence. But absence is its own kind of devotion. I wore your memory like perfume, subtle, lingering, undeniable. You wrote me once a letter with no signature, no return. Just a pressed flower, and words I could never read aloud. I kept it hidden beneath volumes of royal history, like a scandal too sweet to destroy. Every time I turned a page, I imagined your hands had touched it first. We were watercolor, yes, but the kind that doesn't fade, only softens. When they began arranging my future, I nodded, smiled, agreed. I played the role I was born into with grace, but I mourned us quietly, like a widow with no ring. I sometimes wonder, do you still walk through the palace gardens? Do you remember the way I looked at you when no one was watching? They say royal love is always tragic, that we must lose to be respected. But I loved you without shame, even if it was only in secret. Now I wear crowns heavier than my youth. My name is no longer just mine. It belongs to Spain, to history, to duty. But you remain the part of me untouched by title. I see my reflection in gold-framed mirrors, all poised elegance, and think of how your fingers once hovered, never touching, but burning just the same. What are we now? A story not told, a page turned too quickly. But I hold you in the folds of my silence, in the poetry I write in margins, in the smiles I fake so well. You are my rebellion, my gentle, unspeakable revolution. If I ever marry, he will never know that he walks in the shadow of your absence. He will never hear the name I once whispered, like a blessing, into my pillow. But I will know. I will carry your love like contraband in my chest, a smuggled treasure no crown can confiscate. You were the art in my life, the blur of color in a world painted too precise. We were not written in ink, but in watercolor. And maybe that's why, even now, we still bleed into the edges of everything I do.